Weeks bled into months, and Anointed's quiet suspicions about David solidified into a gnawing unease. She began to notice subtle shifts in his demeanor, things she'd previously overlooked. The way his gaze would flicker away when she broached the subject of their marriage. The pervasive sense of distance that clung to him, even within the confines of their home. It felt as though his physical presence was a mere shell, his spirit adrift somewhere far beyond her reach. One evening, as Anointed carefully arranged their dinner, David sat across from her, a silent, contemplative figure. She set the table with an unspoken hope that the comforting warmth of the meal might finally coax him into conversation, yet he merely pushed his food around his plate with a fork, barely taking a bite. "David," she began softly, her voice laced with concern. "Is something troubling you? I feel like you're drifting away. We're married now, but I feel more alone than I ever have before." David finally met her gaze, a small, strained smile touching his lips. "I'm just focused on my duties as a pastor," he explained. "The church is growing and there are so many people who need guidance. It's a lot of responsibility." Anointed nodded, attempting to appear understanding, but an unshakable feeling persisted. A quiet conviction that there was a deeper truth he wasn't sharing. Later that night, with David still out at a church meeting, Anointed sought solace in prayer. She knelt beside their bed, pouring out her heart, pleading for strength, wisdom, and understanding to navigate the growing chasm between them. The following Sunday, Anointed watched from the front row as David delivered his sermon. The church was overflowing, people even standing outside just to catch his every word. David's sermons had undeniably grown more potent, and he was now revered as a prophet, drawing crowds who traveled great distances, eager for his prayers and blessings. Yet, despite the soaring praise, something still felt profoundly wrong to Anointed. While others saw a man touched by God, she alone sensed the immense, unspoken burden he carried in silence. Immediately after the service, David retreated to his office, and Anointed, her patience worn thin, decided to confront him again. She knocked, then entered, finding him seated at his desk, lost in profound contemplation. "David," she stated firmly, her voice unwavering, "I know you're hiding something from me. I am your wife. Please let me help you." David slowly lifted his head, his eyes holding an emotion she couldn't quite decipher. Just then, a knock echoed at the door. A church elder entered, his voice urgent as he announced a large crowd had gathered outside, all hoping for David's prayers. David, visibly relieved by the opportune interruption, quickly rose. "I have to go," he said, turning towards the door. "We'll talk about this later." As he swept out, Anointed remained alone in the office, her heart sinking, burdened by a multitude of unanswered questions. Later that evening, back home from church, Anointed made one final, desperate attempt to bridge the gap between them. She approached David gently, tentatively reaching out to touch his shoulder. But David recoiled swiftly. "I'm tired, Anointed," he said, his voice flat. "It's been a long day." A sharp pang of sadness pierced Anointed. "David, we're husband and wife. Don't you think we should be closer? It's not just about being tired. You keep pushing me away." David's face hardened, his jaw tightening with palpable frustration. "Anointed," he retorted, his voice tinged with accusation. "Do you call yourself a child of God? And yet you're always talking about love and intimacy? Why can't you focus on the church? On our mission to make it even bigger?" Anointed felt her heart plummet, the words crushing her. "So, you married me to be like a piece of furniture?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Someone to just fill a space in your life? David, I'm not asking for anything. That's strange. I'm your wife. I have the right to want love and connection." David's voice turned icy. "Isn't it enough that I care for you? That I provide for you? You have everything. A house, money, expensive clothes, jewelry, even a car. What more do you want?" Tears welled in Anointed's eyes as she met his gaze. "David, I didn't marry you for those things. I married you because I believed you loved me, and I wanted a real partner, not just a provider. Do you even see me as your wife, or just someone you can say is by your side?" "You worry too much, Anointed," David said, his tone almost dismissive. "Do you even know who you're married to? Back in the day, I was the one everyone wanted. Women used to chase after me. You should be grateful you have me." Anointed felt his words cut deep, her heart sinking further. "David, that's not why I married you. I thought we'd share everything, that you'd let me in. I want to know who you really are." For a brief moment, David's face softened, but then his eyes grew cold once more. "Anointed, there are things you wouldn't understand. Some things can't be spoken of. Just let it go." Feeling utterly defeated, Anointed sank into her chair. A formidable wall seemingly erected between them, one that felt impossible to breach. David turned and walked out of the room, leaving her alone with her spiraling thoughts, her cherished dreams of a loving marriage slowly dissolving. The next day, feeling utterly lost and consumed by worry, Anointed made a difficult decision. She would call David's father. She took a deep breath before finally speaking. "Papa, since David and I got married, he hasn't been close to me. I don't know what's wrong." David's father was silent for a moment, caught off guard by her words. He had been anticipating joyful news, perhaps even the announcement of a grandchild. Clearing his throat, he managed, "I thought you were calling with good news, my daughter. I thought you might tell me I'll soon be a grandfather." Anointed sighed, trying desperately to hold back her tears. "I thought so too, Papa. But David keeps saying he needs to wait on the Lord." David's father felt a prick of worry. He had always yearned for grandchildren, and his son's peculiar behavior was becoming increasingly concerning. That evening, he called David, asking him to visit. When David arrived, his father sat him down, his expression serious. "Son, what's going on with you? Your wife tells me you haven't been close to her since you got married. Are you all right?" David chuckled, shaking his head. "Papa, you worry too much. I'm focused on doing the work of the Lord." But his father remained unconvinced. "David, I understand that you want to serve, but family is important too. Your wife deserves love and respect, and I want to see grandchildren one day. This isn't just about you." David frowned, looking away. "Papa, please understand. I have a calling. I'm doing what I believe is right." His father sighed, a heavy weight settling in his heart. He looked his son directly in the eyes. "Son, faith is important, but so is family. You have a duty to both. Don't push those you love away." David remained silent, unable to offer a reply. Anointed's words and his father's earnest advice echoed in his mind as he departed, his thoughts swirling with an unsettling question. What exactly was he sacrificing? truly afraid of, and how long could he keep these walls up around his heart? As months continued to pass, whispers began to ripple through Prophet David's congregation. Church members, particularly observant women, had noticed that Anointed wasn't pregnant, and their curiosity quickly soured into widespread gossip. One Sunday after the service, a small group gathered in a quiet corner of the churchyard. A woman with a sly smile leaned in conspiratorially. "Have you noticed?" she whispered. "Prophet David and his wife have been married for months, and still no child." Another woman raised her eyebrows, offering a knowing look. "Who knows? Maybe he used her womb for his powers. All these miracles he performs? Where do you think they come from?" A third woman shook her head, clearly uncomfortable. "You should mind your own business. Maybe God has a different plan for them. Besides, Anointed is a kind soul. Why spread rumors?" The group continued, oblivious to the fact that Anointed had just overheard snippets of their conversation as she walked past. Her heart sank, and she quickly looked away, pretending not to have heard. A flush of shame and hurt crept up her cheeks. When Anointed arrived home that evening, she couldn't contain her frustration any longer. She poured out everything she had heard, the whispers, the hurtful accusations, the nasty gossip. She could barely finish her words before tears welled in her eyes. David's face darkened with anger. "They think they can come to my church, receive blessings, and still speak against us?" he muttered, clenching his fists. "I'll show them who they're dealing with." That Sunday, Prophet David stood before his congregation, his eyes scanning the crowd until they landed on the two women who had spread the rumors. He addressed the congregation, his voice echoing through the building, stern and commanding. "There are some among us who think it's right to spread lies," he announced. "Some who think they can tarnish the names of God's chosen servants. You know who you are, and I won't allow such wickedness in this holy place." The two women looked down, clearly uncomfortable, their faces turning pale as a murmur rippled through the crowd. David didn't stop there. "If you think you can judge God's work without consequences, you are wrong. This is my final warning to those who gossip and lie in God's house." He pointed a direct finger at the two women. "I don't want to see either of you here again." Gasps filled the church, and the two women quickly rose from their seats, hurrying out of the church in shame. David continued his sermon as if nothing had happened, but a palpable wave of tension had settled over the room. After the service, David called Michael, one of his loyal ushers, into his office. Michael was a humble young man, always devoted to the church, but he was struggling financially and often confided his troubles in David. David looked him over, a small, calculating smile playing on his lips. David paused, then spoke carefully. "I want you to help me fulfill my duty as a husband. You know I am busy with God's work, and I can't be distracted, but it is time. My wife, Anointed, has a child." He fixed his gaze on Michael. "If you do this, I'll make sure you're rewarded greatly." After David made his offer, Michael's eyes went wide with shock. He shook his head quickly, taking a step back. "No, Prophet David, I can't do that," Michael stammered. "I respect you and your wife, but this isn't right." David leaned forward, his voice calm but firm. "Michael, think carefully. This is a once-in-a-lifetime chance to lift yourself and your family out of hardship. Do you think the Lord would abandon his faithful servant when there's a way to ease his suffering?" Michael shook his head again, but then thoughts of his mother flooded his mind. She had been in the hospital for weeks, with bills piling up that he couldn't pay. He thought of her lying there waiting for help that never seemed to come. His heart grew heavy with guilt and worry. Finally, he looked up at David, his voice trembling. My mother. She's in the hospital. The bills are so high, and I can't pay them. He paused, struggling with his words. If I do this, will you help me cover her hospital expenses? David smiled and placed a reassuring hand on Michael's shoulder. Of course, Michael. Consider it done. You help me, and I'll make sure your mother gets the care she needs. Michael took a deep breath, feeling the crushing weight of his decision. Okay, I'll do it, he said quietly. But listen, David added, his tone suddenly serious. You must not tell anyone about this. It has to stay between us. If anyone finds out, it could ruin everything. Do you understand? Michael nodded, a mix of fear and grim determination in his eyes. I understand. I won't tell anyone. With that, the two shook hands, sealing their secret pact. Michael felt a heavy burden settle on his heart, knowing he was crossing a line he never thought he would. But for the sake of his mother, he was willing to do what it took. When David got home, he found Anointed sitting in their living room, her expression a mix of concern and lingering love. He walked up to her, taking her hands in his. I'm sorry for how I've been. I've changed, he said earnestly. Tonight we're going to have a wonderful time together as husband and wife. But first, we need to drink a little. Anointed's eyes widened in surprise. Drink? But you know alcohol is against our faith. I don't drink, and I won't start now. David stepped closer, his voice softening. I love you so much, my wife. This is important to me. Alcohol will help me with some things. If you really love me, you will support me. People are talking behind our backs about not having children. Let's put an end to their gossip. Anointed hesitated, her heart torn. She wanted to support her husband, but she also knew this went against everything she believed in. Finally, feeling the immense pressure of his words and the heavy weight of their situation, she reluctantly agreed. Fine, but just a little. They went to the kitchen, and David poured 2 glasses. Unbeknownst to Anointed, he had filled her glass with alcohol, but had secretly been drinking water himself. Cheers, he said, raising his glass with a smile. Anointed raised her glass, and they both took a drink. A sip. At first, she felt uneasy, but David kept encouraging her. Just relax, my love. This will help us. As the night wore on, they drank more, and Anointed began to feel lightheaded. The alcohol made her sleepy, and soon she was struggling to keep her eyes open. David, I'm feeling so tired, she mumbled before she finally fell asleep on the couch. David walked over to the door and opened it, allowing Michael to step inside. Michael wasted no time and immediately took control of the situation with Anointed. Meanwhile, David was in the next room, tears streaming down his face as he cried bitterly. The sounds of what was happening were almost too much for him to bear. When Michael finally finished and left, David felt utterly devastated. He slumped to the floor, questioning his life choices. What kind of life is this? What have I gotten myself into? He thought, feeling a deep sense of regret and sorrow. As dawn broke, Anointed woke up, her head pounding from the excessive alcohol. She was furious. Why did you give me so much to drink? She demanded, her voice filled with anger. Don't ever do that again. David, filled with guilt and remorse, quickly apologized. I'm so sorry, Anointed. I didn't mean for things to get out of hand. It won't happen again, I promise. At church the next day, Michael walked up to David after the service, looking upset. "Prophet David," he said quietly, "I need to talk to you about the money we talked about." David turned to him and feigned innocence. "What about it?" Michael crossed his arms. "You promised me some money for helping you. I thought you would pay me now since I've done my part." David shook his head. "No, not yet. My wife has to be pregnant first before I give you anything." Michael's eyes widened. "What do you mean? That's not what we agreed on. I helped you with this plan. I should get paid now." David's face grew serious. "Listen, Michael, I don't have time for this. You knew the deal. Anointed has to be pregnant or I can't pay you. It's that simple." "But I took a risk for this," Michael said, getting frustrated. "What if someone finds out? What if this goes wrong? You're putting me in a bad spot." David stepped closer and spoke quietly. "You agreed to help me. You need this money for your mom's hospital bills. Don't act like you didn't want to do it." Michael hesitated, looking confused. He really needed the money, but he was worried about getting caught. "I thought I would get something for my trouble," he said quietly. David sighed and ran his hand through his hair. "I'll make it worth it. I promise. Just focus on getting her pregnant first. Once she's expecting, I'll give you your share. You'll see." With that, David turned away, leaving Michael feeling frustrated and cheated. He felt trapped in a plan that was becoming more complicated every day. For the next few nights, David continued his plan with Anointed. He would persuade her to drink with him, telling her it was the only way he could be a good husband. Reluctantly, Anointed would agree, though she still felt uneasy about it. She loved David and wanted to make their marriage work. So, she went along with his wishes. Once she was asleep from the effects of the alcohol, Michael would come in as secretly arranged by David. Under the cover of night, he would have his way with her, taking advantage of the situation without her knowing. Each night, David would play along with the charade, keeping up the appearance of a loving husband who was just trying to make things right. After a few weeks of this, Anointed began to feel strange. She felt tired all the time, and soon she started feeling sick in the mornings. Worried, she went to the doctor, who confirmed that she was pregnant. Excited, Anointed rushed home to tell David the news. "I'm pregnant," she announced with joy, feeling her heart swell with happiness at the thought of starting a family. David put on a big smile and hugged her, acting overjoyed. "Finally," he said as he embraced her. He then called his father and proudly shared the news, saying, "You're going to be a grandfather soon." David's father was overjoyed, thrilled that their family would soon be growing. On Sunday, David stood before his congregation, filled with pride, ignoring Anointed's quiet request to keep the pregnancy private. He raised his hands to quiet the crowd and announced, "I have wonderful news to share with you all. My dear wife Anointed is expecting a child." The congregation erupted in cheers and applause. People were overjoyed, clapping and calling out blessings for the soon-to-be parents. Some came forward after the service, congratulating them and showering them with well wishes. It was as if David's announcement had lifted a weight from the church. All the gossip and whispers of doubt began to fade, replaced by excitement for the prophet's growing family. After the service, Michael quietly slipped into David's office, keeping his voice low as he offered his congratulations. "Congratulations, Prophet," he said, forcing a smile as he clasped his hands together nervously. "I'm really happy for you and Anointed." David nodded, barely looking up as he gathered his things. Michael took a deep breath and continued. "About the money you promised to pay me once the news was confirmed. My mother's surgery is scheduled soon, and I need the money urgently." David turned and waved him off, smiling in a way that didn't reach his eyes. "Don't worry, Michael. I'll make sure you're taken care of," he said dismissively. "Come back next week and we'll talk." Michael's face fell, a mix of worry and frustration flashing across his features. "But Prophet, the hospital says my mother can't wait another week. Please, you promised." David's smile faded, replaced by a stern look. "I said next week. Be patient, Michael. Don't you trust me?" he replied, his tone icy. Michael swallowed hard, feeling defeated. He knew it would be pointless to argue further, so he left the office quietly, though his heart felt heavy with worry and frustration. As he walked out of the church, he wondered how much longer he could keep waiting while his mother needed him the most. 2 days later, Michael's world came crashing down. His mother, who had been holding on in the hospital, passed away. He wondered how much longer he could keep waiting while his mother needed him the most. 2 days later, Michael's world came crashing down. His mother, who had been holding, the news shattered him. She was gone, all because he couldn't get the money he had desperately needed for her surgery. Grief and unbridled anger consumed his heart as he sat in his small room, clutching a photo of her. Tears streamed down his face, and his mind raced with painful memories and crushing regrets. In a fit of rage and sorrow, he grabbed his phone and dialed Prophet David's number. The moment David answered, Michael's voice erupted, roaring with fury. "Are you happy now, Prophet? My mother is dead. She's gone because you broke your promise. All this pain, all this shame, it's all because of you." There was a chilling silence on the other end before David finally replied, his voice calm and cold. "Michael, mind your words. Remember who you're speaking to." Michael's grief transformed into pure, unadulterated anger. "You call yourself a man of God? You promised to help, and when I needed you the most, you ignored me. You've lied to everyone, including your own wife, and used me like some puppet. Well, no more. I'll tell everyone what you made me do. I'll expose the truth, and people will know the real you." David's voice dropped to a menacing tone. "Think carefully, Michael. If you open your mouth about this, there will be consequences. And don't test me. If you speak a single word about our agreement, you will regret it." Michael clenched his fists, feeling a chill run down his spine. But his anger overpowered his fear. "Do you think I care anymore? I have lost everything. I have nothing left to lose. I will do whatever it takes to make sure people see who you really are." David let out a cold laugh. "Then prepare yourself, Michael. If you go against me, you'll meet the same fate as anyone who dares to cross me. You will not live to tell that story." The phone call ended, leaving Michael standing alone, trembling with rage and fear. He felt trapped, torn between his desperate desire to reveal the truth and the terrifying threat David had just made. Late that night, David sat alone in his dimly lit office, his mind racing with fear and anger. He knew Michael could ruin everything if he spoke, but the only one who could help him was the Great One. Desperate, David closed his eyes and called out, "Great One, Great One, Great One." A chilling wind swept through the room, and the old man appeared, his eyes glinting with dark amusement. "Why have you called me, David?" he asked, his voice as smooth and cold as ice. David clenched his fists, his face filled with grim determination. "Great One, Michael has betrayed me. He wants to expose our secret. I need him, gone forever." The old man raised a brow, a sly smile creeping onto his face. "You wish for Michael's death, then?" "Yes," David replied without hesitation. "He can't ruin everything I've worked for." The old man's smile faded, replaced by a grave expression. "Nothing in this world comes without a price, David, you know that. If I am to take Michael's life, there is something you must sacrifice." David swallowed hard. "What is it?" The old man's eyes darkened, and he spoke slowly. "The life growing inside your wife. Her pregnancy must be given up. That is the cost." David felt his heart twist. This was his long-awaited child, the one he had paraded before his congregation. The thought of losing the baby struck him, but he couldn't see another way. If Michael exposed the truth, he would lose everything. The church, his power, his reputation. Taking a shaky breath, David looked the old man in the eyes. "Do it." The old man grinned, a wicked satisfaction in his expression. He raised his hand and murmured something under his breath. Words in a language David didn't understand. The room seemed to fill with a dark mist as the old man's words echoed and twisted around them. Then, as quickly as the mist appeared, it vanished. The old man lowered his hand, his eyes gleaming with victory. "It is done," he said, his voice low and menacing. "Michael will not see the light of another day. But remember, David, you have paid a heavy price." The old man disappeared, leaving David alone in the profound silence. The next morning, news of Michael's death spread like wildfire. People whispered about how he had been found lifeless, with no explanation for his sudden passing. David's heart pounded with a strange mixture of relief and fear. Relief that his secret was safe, but fear at the terrible price he had just paid. Later that evening, Anointed collapsed at home, clutching her stomach. She was rushed to the hospital, but the doctors could do nothing. She had lost the baby. When David arrived and saw her lying in the hospital bed, her face pale and her eyes filled with tears, a sharp pang of guilt twisted in his chest. She reached for his hand, her voice barely a whisper. "Why did this happen, David? Our baby." David forced himself to hold her hand, but he couldn't bring himself to look into her eyes. He mumbled, "It must be God's will," trying to sound calm. But inside, he was haunted by the truth he could never tell. It wasn't long before whispers spread like wildfire. The two women David had banned from his church, the same ones he had humiliated in front of the congregation, started spreading rumors again. Everywhere they went, they would lean in close and speak in hushed tones, feeding the fire of gossip that spread through the town. One of the women, Auntie Clara, shook her head as she spoke to her neighbors. "Didn't I tell you all?" she whispered, her eyes wide with false concern. "I knew something wasn't right with that prophet. His wife loses a baby just like that. Do you think that's normal? No, that baby was a sacrifice. He used that poor child for rituals." Beside her, Mama Binta, who had once been one of David's most loyal followers, nodded vigorously. "Ah, I believe you now, Clara. I didn't see it before, but now it's clear. I mean, how can a man's church grow so fast? And then this tragedy happens. It's not natural, my sister. It's not. Thank God we stopped going to his church. Who knows what he might have done to us, too?" They went from house to house, telling anyone who would listen, "Be careful, oh. That prophet is not who he seems. I heard that his wife's family is suffering because of him, and she's too blinded to see it," Auntie Clara would say, shaking her head sadly. Mama Benna added fuel to the fire, her voice laced with spite. "Yes, I even heard that he doesn't even sleep at night. Who knows what evil he's plotting when everyone else is resting? I thank God we left that church before he used us for his dark deeds." People who had once admired Prophet David began to look at him differently. Some of his congregation started whispering among themselves, exchanging nervous glances whenever he walked by. Mothers held their children closer, and people who used to greet him warmly now crossed the street to avoid him. Meanwhile, David heard the rumors but tried to ignore them, telling himself it was just the work of jealous people. But deep down, the gossip stung. He could feel his once loyal followers slipping through his fingers like sand, and it scared him. He noticed the empty seats growing in the church on Sundays, the way some people came, but avoided looking at him. At night, David lay awake, haunted by guilt and fear. He had gained everything he wanted: power, success, a large following, but now it felt like it was all slipping away. The words of the Great One echoed in his mind, reminding him of the terrible choices he had made. As David lay on his bed, his mind racing, the Great One appeared in a cloud of dark mist. His presence filled the room with an icy chill, and his eyes glowed with a menacing red light. He looked down at David with a twisted smile that sent shivers down David's spine. "David," he said, his voice echoing with a darkness that made the walls tremble. "Do you know why your church is losing members? It's because of me. You turned your back on your promises. Now, if you wish to keep your power, you must offer me 2 sacrifices: your father and your wife." David's heart raced as dread filled his chest. He shook his head, his face pale with fear. "No," he whispered, his voice trembling. "I will never harm them. I don't care about this power anymore. I'm tired. I'm done with all of this. Let it end. If it means I have to die, then so be it." The Great One's face twisted in fury, his eyes blazing with rage. "How dare you, ungrateful soul! After all I've given you, this is how you repay me? Very well. If you refuse me, you will lose everything you hold dear." David's jaw tightened, his face defiant. "I'm not afraid of you anymore," he declared. "I will confess everything. Tell the world the truth. I'll expose you and every terrible thing you made me do. This ends now." The Great One's smile faded, replaced by an expression of cold, terrifying anger. "You think you can speak against me? You think anyone will believe you?" With a wave of his hand, a powerful force struck David. His mouth opened to scream, but no sound came out. He tried to shout, to call for help, but no words formed. He couldn't hear anything either. Everything had gone silent. The Great One's voice filled his mind one last time. "From this moment on, you are mute. You are deaf. You will never speak again, nor hear the sound of your own voice. I leave you in your silence. May it be your prison. Forever." David collapsed to the floor, tears streaming down his face. He tried to cry out, to call for help, but no words came. Panic gripped him, and he reached up to touch his mouth, hoping this nightmare would end. But it was real. He was deaf and mute, trapped in a silence so deep that he could hear nothing but the pounding of his own heart. Anointed, hearing a muffled noise, rushed into the room. She found David curled up on the floor, his face wet with tears, his hands shaking. She knelt beside him, alarmed by the raw pain and fear in his eyes. "David, "What's wrong?" she asked, her voice gentle but full of worry. But David couldn't hear her. He couldn't even see her lips clearly through his tears. She reached out, trying to comfort him, but he pulled back, frustrated and broken. "David, please tell me what's happening. Why are you crying?" Anointed urged, her voice trembling with concern. Desperate to explain, David opened his mouth to speak, but no words came. His face crumpled in despair, and he shook his head, utterly unable to share the torment that had just befallen him. He covered his face with his hands, his shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Anointed held him, feeling utterly helpless, her own eyes filling with tears. "I don't understand," she whispered, her heart aching at the sight of her husband in such anguish. "What happened to you? Please, let me in. I want to help you." David looked up at her, his eyes wide and desperate. He tried to sign, to gesture the horrors that had unfolded, but his hands trembled too much to convey anything meaningful. He mouthed words she couldn't understand, his eyes pleading for her to grasp the enormity of his pain. The silence hung heavy in the air, and Anointed felt a deep sense of dread. She had never seen David like this. The man she married was strong and confident, a leader who had inspired so many. But now he seemed like a shadow of his former self, burdened by secrets and fear. "David, please," she begged, trying to catch his gaze. "I can't help if you don't tell me what's wrong. I love you. Whatever it is, we can face it together." In that moment, David felt a flicker of hope. Maybe he could find a way to tell her, to share the truth of what had happened. But as he looked into her concerned eyes, the crushing weight of his choices pressed down on him. How could he reveal the darkness he had embraced? How could he tell her that their lives were now entangled in a web of deceit and horror? Instead, he took her hands and held them tightly. He wanted to reassure her, to let her know he was still there, that he loved her. But the words remained locked inside him, and the silence felt like chains that bound him to his fate. Suddenly, there was a loud crash from outside. Anointed jumped to her feet, alarmed. "What was that?" she asked, her voice trembling. David felt the urgency in her tone and wanted to warn her about the danger that might come from the Great One. He tried to stand, but the weight of despair held him down. Anointed turned towards the door, and David instinctively grabbed her arm. She looked back at him, her eyes wide with fear. Confusion. He wanted to scream at her to stay inside, to protect her from whatever darkness loomed outside, but he was trapped in silence. With a determined look, Anointed pushed the door open and stepped out into the night. David's heart raced as he followed her, the chill of the night air sending shivers down his spine. Outside, shadows danced under the moonlight, and the whispers of the wind seemed to carry a warning. "David, what is happening?" she called, but he couldn't answer. He felt a deepening sense of fear as the atmosphere thickened with a strange energy. Suddenly, the Great One's laugh echoed in the air, cold and mocking. "You think you can escape your fate?" he taunted, materializing from the shadows, his presence overwhelming. Anointed gasped, stepping back in fright, but David moved forward instinctively, trying to protect her. "Stay away from her!" he tried to shout, but the silence wrapped around him like a shroud. The Great One's eyes glinted with amusement as he surveyed David's helplessness. "You have lost your voice, but you still believe you can fight back." Anointed looked between David and the Great One, fear flashing across her face. "Who are you?" she demanded. standing firm despite the dread creeping into her heart. "I am the one who holds your husband's fate," the Great One replied, his voice dripping with malice. "And soon I will take everything from you both." "David!" Anointed cried, reaching for him, but the Great One raised his hand and shadows swirled around her. David could only watch in horror as Anointed stumbled back, caught in a web of dark energy. "No!" David mouthed, desperation flooding his heart. He stepped forward, attempting to break the barrier that kept him from reaching her. But the darkness pushed him back, a powerful force separating them. "Your time is up, David," the Great One said, his voice cold and cruel. "I gave you power, and I will take it away. If you will not make the sacrifices I demand, you will lose everything you love." David fell to his knees, tears streaming down his face. He felt utterly powerless, torn between the love for his wife and the horrors he had faced. As Anointed struggled against the shadows, he could only wish to protect her, to keep her safe from the evil that threatened to destroy them both. Anointed stood up, feeling a mix of fear and determination. She took a deep breath and started to pray, reciting strong Bible verses that echoed in the eerie silence. "God gives us power to fight against evil," she declared, her voice steady and strong. The Great One laughed, his voice chilling. "You think you can hurt me? I have destroyed many like you. I am darkness, and you are just a tiny light. You cannot challenge me." Anointed didn't let his words scare her. She continued to pray. "I am a child of God. I stand on his promises. You evil spirit, I command you to go away right now." Her voice grew louder, filled with strength from her faith. As the darkness surrounded her, she shouted, "No weapon against me will win." The ground shook a little, and the shadows seemed to pull back from her. Surprised by her strength, the Great One's laughter started to fade as he realized she was not afraid. "You cannot defeat me, I am forever," he yelled, but Anointed didn't give up. She kept praying, her voice rising with power. "Let God arise, and let his enemies be scattered," she shouted, the words coming straight from her heart. The dark shadows began to fade away, and the Great One stumbled back, looking angry and shocked. "What is happening? No, this cannot be!" he cried out. Anointed kept going. "You will not hurt my husband or anyone else. Your time is over. I command you to leave and never come back." With one last powerful prayer, she raised her hands high. "By the blood of Jesus, I break your hold over us. In his name, I destroy you." Suddenly, a bright light filled the room, shining like the sun. The Great One screamed in anger as the light surrounded him. "No! This cannot be! I will not go!" he shouted. But the light grew brighter and brighter. Then, with a loud crash, the Great One disappeared, his evil gone forever. The heavy feeling that had filled the room lifted, and David suddenly felt warm and alive again. He gasped, hearing the sound of his breath. The silence was gone, and he could hear everything again. He looked at Anointed, who was glowing with joy. "David!" she cried, her voice full of happiness. He rushed to her and wrapped his arms around her tightly. They were both filled with thankfulness and love. "I thought I lost you," David said, tears rolling down his cheeks. "I couldn't speak or hear. But you saved me." He held her close, feeling happy to be together again. "I was scared too. But I knew God was with us," Anointed replied, her voice shaking a little but strong. "Together we can face anything. Nothing can stop the power of God." They hugged each other tightly, feeling strong and united. They knew that they were not alone and that God was with them, giving them strength. "Let's rebuild our lives," David said, looking into her eyes, now full of hope. "We will use this power for good. We will help others who are suffering." "Yes," Anointed agreed, her voice bright and full of determination. "We will share our story. We will help others find the strength we found." At that moment, they both knew their journey was just starting. With God by their side, they could face anything. A few months later, Anointed began to notice some changes. She felt tired more often, her appetite grew, and she experienced a fluttery feeling in her stomach. She wondered if it could mean she was finally pregnant. Every day she thought about it, and her heart filled with hope. One morning, she decided to visit the clinic to confirm. David went with her, feeling nervous but excited. They held hands tightly, both hoping for good news. After a few tests, the doctor came back with a gentle smile. "Congratulations, Anointed," the doctor said. "You're pregnant?" Anointed's eyes filled with tears of joy. She looked at David, who was grinning with pride and excitement. "We're going to be parents," she whispered, barely able to believe it. David hugged her tightly. "This is a blessing," he said. "I'm so grateful." Later, as the weeks passed and her belly began to grow, they decided to go for an ultrasound to check on the baby. The doctor moved the scanner over her stomach and a clear image appeared on the screen. Then, the doctor's face lit up with a smile. "Anointed, David! You're having twins!" Their hearts overflowed with joy. Twins! They couldn't believe how blessed they were. Anointed and David hugged, their dreams of a family now twice as wonderful as they had ever imagined. They left the clinic hand in hand, looking forward to the joyful journey ahead with their two little miracles.